Linguistics Behind the Scenes.
What you always wanted to know about language and how to explore it.
With Christina Sanchez-Stockhammer.
And Dominic Piazza. Hello everyone, welcome back to Linguistics Behind the Scenes.
Yes, hooray, we're back. Hello Dominic.
Yes, hi Christina. Always happy to be back, always happy. And Christina, you know, every program, TV show always has an intro and an outro, like little bookends at the beginning and end of the program.
Yeah, I mean, it's convenient because that way the listeners, they know what to expect.
Exactly. And even, you know, if it's a really beloved TV show, the intro can kind of become iconic over time, right? Because you watch it every single time you see an episode, and then people can feel very nostalgic over, certain TV intros, openings, theme songs, theme music, also very common. Mm-hmm. But, we also have an intro and an outro here on our podcast that we put together. And, every time we do an intro and outro, it's sort of like a copy of the last time, but not an exact copy. We sort of do it differently every time.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, like for the outro, it's typically kind of more similar because we try to have, a specific sentence that we thought might be nice to end the podcast with.
Catchphrase, slogan.
Catchphrase, yeah, the slogan. But for the intro, it's just kind of getting into it, but still we greet everyone out there. I often say hello everyone out there and things like that.
I do. I like that. Yeah.
But it's not really a copy, right? I mean, there's variation. I mean, you would expect a copy to be quite similar, possibly even identical every time like we produce it, if it was supposed to be a copy.
Exactly. And copying, in the realm of linguistics, language, especially writing, is incredibly relevant.
It is. I mean, I wrote an article about it. So, I feel it's an interesting topic. And of course, it's something that is highly relevant for academic writing, but also in other contexts, because in language, there's a lot of copying, I would say.
Absolutely. I need to find out who invented the copy and paste function on computers because that is an incredible person, a very blessed person. I value the copy and paste function very highly. So, Christina, you said you wrote a paper on copying in language. What was the exact angle of this?
Well, I wanted to look at what copying is in relation to language, where it occurs, and then also look at things like quoting in academic writing and also plagiarism, which I think is a highly relevant topic.
Yes. Well, we have a saying in English, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Of course, there are times when we should imitate and times when we shouldn't. But I think if we're going to talk about these topics like copying and plagiarism, maybe the best place to start would be to quickly run down the etymology of these terms. I
mean, the word copy ultimately goes back to Latin and it means a transcript. But I think that plagiarism is a lot more interesting because plagiarism, I mean, it also comes from Latin, but it goes back to Greek and that comes from the word for kidnapping.
Yes, it does. A kidnapper. Yes, can you imagine? It really communicates the gravity of the crime of plagiarism. You're kidnapping someone else's work.
Yeah, you're kidnapping it because you're pretending when you plagiarize something. I mean, basically that means that you pretend that something is your idea when it isn't. You pass off someone else's idea as your own. So you're kidnapping that idea. You're kind of pulling it into your own text. And of course, that's not okay. I mean, there's a few things that you're not supposed to do when you carry out research. And one of them is plagiarism. So you should always indicate who the author of an idea is if it's not your own idea.
Absolutely. Yeah. Copy is, a rather neutral word, but plagiarize is certainly a very negative word. But copying in itself is not necessarily bad at all. It's a huge part of science, right? That we are standing on the shoulders of giants. We are able to learn new things in science by building on everything that came before.
Exactly, yeah. So that's why we have references to what was said before. I mean, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Actually, it's usually a good idea to look at what other people wrote on the same subject before, and then to paraphrase these ideas. And also sometimes you want to quote these ideas. But I mean, there's a difference between paraphrasing ideas and quoting, because in the case of paraphrasing, you express these ideas in your own words. But if you quote something, then of course it has to be exactly the same wording, and then you put quotation marks around it. And it's very important that it really is exactly the same wording, because what you're doing is you're saying, that other person said exactly this. And of course, if you don't get it precisely right, then they might not be happy to see that someone claims they said this thing you wrote, you know. So for that reason, quotation marks are reserved for exact copies. But even there, I mean, there's differences.
Exactly. Yeah, you're exactly right. If I was being quoted, well, I mean, it's in the word quoted. To quote someone is to repeat what they said verbatim, as we say, so exactly word for word. Paraphrasing is also perfectly okay. Scientists paraphrase all the time. But when you paraphrase, you don't use quotation marks, although you have to make sure to cite. That's a sticking point sometimes. When you paraphrase someone else's work, you have to cite your sources.
Yeah, so you have to indicate the name of the author and typically also, for example, the year in some way. And then at the end of an academic article, you will have a list of references so that readers can identify what text that particular idea came from, because they might want to read more about it. And that's the thing. That's why you have that list of references. I mean, in the beginning, when you start studying, you might think, oh, that's the most boring part of a text. Whoever reads the list of books, of articles that were used? But actually, if you want to do research on a topic yourself, I mean, that's so valuable, because of course you go there and then you find all the articles in which ideas are talked about that you're interested in.
Oh, totally. Yeah. When you're writing a research article, you might just mention something sort of in passing. You mention it, you cite the source, and then you move on to the next idea. And so if the reader finds that idea really interesting, they think, oh, I actually want to read more about that. Well, then the source is right there, and they can obtain the source, whether it's a research paper they can find online or a book that they can find in print. They can read more about it. So it's great for everyone. It's great for the original authors, and it's great for the readers.
Yeah, and I mean, in academic research, we try to be very precise, and so I mean that quotation that should be identical, you would believe, and it is, but there's still a few things that change. That's very funny. So because of course, I mean, you want to conserve all the letters, all the numbers, all the symbols, all the punctuation marks, all the spacing and capitalization and things like that. But the thing is, there's a few things that you don't conserve. Let's imagine you have a text that is written in a particular font, like Times New Roman, which is what you typically get in a newspaper. And then, well, the text that you're writing uses a different font, like Arial or Calibri, for example. You don't have to use the font of the original text. You just copy, paste the text, and then it's okay to use a different font and a different font size, for example.
Yeah. And there's a lot of nuance and artistry to this. Yeah. Or like, for example, if you're reading older English writing. So, okay, I'll take like the Declaration of Independence or the U.S. Constitution, for example. At that time, it seemed to be the style that they would capitalize all the nouns, almost like in German. And to modernize, it's a bit tricky to read because, my brain is programmed that if a noun starts with a capital letter, it's a proper noun. And so if you were going to copy one of these old documents and you decided to instead maybe change the capitalization to conform to modern standards, would that be wrong? Does it really change the meaning all that much? I'm not sure. It depends on your objectives.
Yeah, and I would say it also depends on the kind of style you're using. I mean, when you're writing an academic article, you usually have to follow the style of the journal or the publisher, basically, where you want to publish the text. Yeah. And in some cases, you're supposed to follow a style guide, which says you really have to keep the capitalization. And actually, I would say, to me, the capitalization is really important. So I would like it to be kept, but I know that there's other style guides where this is not the case. Yeah, and I would even keep it, for example, in the, like, if I had to change, let's say, in a quotation that starts at the beginning of a sentence with a capital letter, but I want to integrate that within my sentence, then I would actually have to take that capital T of the word that, and I would need to write brackets around it so that it's a small t, a lowercase t, just to indicate that this is a change. So I would say I'm pretty strict regarding these things.
Yes, yeah. I totally hear what you're saying. Yeah, or well, when it's older English writing, spellings were less standardized back then. So sometimes you might see words spelled in unfamiliar ways, and it's not really a typo, so to speak. It's just that sometimes there were many ways words could be spelled. And so are you going to respell them to match modern spellings? Or are you going to leave it the way it is? Might be best to leave it the way it is, right? Because you actually might want to study that. You might want to study the way the words were originally spelled. So if you took out that information, you'd be doing a disservice.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to really keep it as it is, at least when it's a quotation. So as soon as you have the quotation marks around it, the standard, what you have to reproduce is very high. So to me, that includes the capitalization, that includes the punctuation marks, but there's one exception. And I mean, we talked about hyphens before in this podcast, but so when you reach the end of a line, you might have a hyphen in the middle of a word. So in the case of the word water, if you reach the end of the line, it could be war hyphen t. And I mean, let's assume you wanted to quote a sentence in which you use the word water. Well, in that case, you wouldn't want to have a line break in the middle of your quotation. So what you would do is you would just delete that hyphen. You wouldn't even mention there was a hyphen. And that is because just like the font type and the font size, these are things which are not part of the essence of the text, like capitalization, like the letters, like the numbers.
Yeah, exactly. That it's just a visual side effect of the formatting. I suppose it could even be possible the original author may not have even put it in there, right? The author submits the work and then it gets modified to conform to the formatting of the way it gets printed.
Yeah, exactly. So in some cases, as an author, you will submit a text without any line, like without any hyphenation at the end of lines. And then the publisher will just add that. And you're okay with it because it's something superficial, you know? But what you said before, I mean, if you have these spellings that are different from the standard, or where you would say, oh, wait a moment, this even looks wrong. For example, if you have a sentence like this is John's car, and someone spells John's without the apostrophe before the S, you know? Yeah. I mean, that's incorrect. But of course, if you're quoting that exact sentence, then you actually have to take it over, but it looks as if you made a mistake. But you want to avoid that because you didn't. You want to show, okay, I'm doing it the right way. I'm just copying what that person said. So it's kind of the garbage in, garbage out principle. And so what you can do is you can add sick. Do you know the sick?
I absolutely do. Yeah, I see it from time to time, and maybe even in news articles. For example, if they're quoting maybe something someone wrote online, well, when people are writing things on social media, the standard's not that high for getting everything exactly right. They might make a typo. And so if it's being quoted and the typo's in there, the news article might write sick to say that it's not their typo.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, sic in that case is spelled S-I-C because it comes from Latin and it means thus or so, meaning, okay, this is exactly how I found this. And you typically write it in angled brackets or rather square brackets, right? So they look a bit like a square when you put them around something. Is that the right word, Dominic?
I think it is in Britain, yes. But in America, just saying brackets refers to these square brackets.
Oh, wow. Okay. Again, one of those regional differences.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. But I really like the word sick, by the way. Sometimes people also make fun and they say, bad spelling makes me sick.
Oh, yeah. Perfectly fitting. That joke is perfectly fitting. Yeah. But you're trying to show that you've copied it exactly. And there are other types of copies in our lives. You know, we have photocopies, and we also have fax machines. And
yes.
fax is short for facsimile.
Which means?
It means a copy, but I would almost say it means an exact copy. So it's really a perfect copy.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, like, I suppose you would also expect it's a perfect copy. And I mean, like, if you look at the etymology, it means basically make similar, make alike.
Make like in Latin. And it has simile in it, right? Simile, which is in language, simile is to say that something is like something else.
Exactly. It's interesting that you know all these machines, Dominic. I mean, fax machines. I mean, I can't remember having used a fax machine in years. But I mean, photocopying, I mean, that's like in German, we just call that kopieren or fotokopieren, you know. And that is... that's really something that I had to do a lot for my PhD thesis. So at the time, I just got a lot of books. I went through them. I put some Post-its in them, and then I photocopied those pages to read them and then to use those notes and further process them. Well, now I'm very, very often using digital articles. So have you ever used a photocopying machine?
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, when it comes to faxing, I hear that fax machines are very much alive and well in countries like Japan, which is surprising because Japan, externally, Japan is associated with advanced technology, and yet they're still using fax machines. Photocopying. Have I ever photocopied anything? I don't think I've ever had to, but in school, the teachers photocopied things all the time. And you could tell it was photocopied because it would have like artifacts on it, like kind of distorted artifacts from the copying process.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's pretty normal. And I mean, sometimes when you make a photocopy of a photocopy, it gets worse.
It gets worse. That's what can happen making a copy of a copy of a copy. Almost reminds me, we talked about the game of telephone, right? Where you relay a message from person to person and the message will probably get distorted along the way. On the internet, in meme culture, there's these things called deep-friedmemes. And basically it's just images where, for the comedic effect, very heavy compression, distortion artifacts from repeated copying are applied to them because people feel it adds to the humor.
Yeah, but again, I mean, like, the copy is not perfect, and that's what happens in many cases. And by the way, that game of telephone that you just mentioned, in German, it's called Flüsterpost, which is whispering post.
Oh, okay. Yeah, usually you whisper in their ear, you whisper the message. Yeah, okay. Nice. Very nice. I'm sure, we could probably look up what the name of this is in many different languages, I'm sure. Nice.
Yeah, I think it's also called Chinese whispers. I mean, I don't know where that is used.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
That's the name by which I once learned it. But yeah, probably because you say, okay, in the end, it sounds like Chinese because something that the thing you get in the end is no longer what you have in the beginning, and it sounds Chinese to you. So in different languages, I mean, you have different words, different adjectives of different other languages that you use to express that you don't understand something. What is it in English? Is it Chinese or is it Spanish? I mean, in German we have das kommt mir Spanisch vor.
That means it's all Greek to me.
Oh, all Greek
is that
to
what
me.
You
oh, right.
Yeah, it's all Greek to me. Which I feel Greek is considerably different from English. I feel that Spanish, well, it's different from German, but that's not the most extremely different language, right?
Yeah, that's true.
At least they have some of that shared Latin vocabulary.
That's true.
on the topic of different countries, different cultures, it's come to my attention in recent years that different cultures can have different perspectives on quoting and copying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, on the one hand, of course, you could say it's boring to copy, to imitate. You should be creative. You should do your own things. But on the other hand, you could also have a positive attitude towards it. You could argue that it's a way of honoring important ideas or important authors, you know. And so it's just like with many other things. You can have different perspectives on the same thing.
So far, our conversation has mostly revolved around the realm of written language. Naturally, I think when we think of copying, we think of text and written language. But copying can also exist in the realm of spoken language as well, right?
It can, but it's much more difficult. I mean, just imagine you had to copy something to reproduce it in an identical way. It's very hard. I mean, it depends on how long it is. But I mean, we do that all the time. I mean, individual words. I mean, the words that we use have been used before. So every time we use a word, in some way, we could argue it's a copy. But then on another level, it isn't really a copy, because we could rather say, well, in our minds, we have something like a matrix, like a mold, like a stamp that we use. And then we kind of, when we produce language, when we produce speech, every time we do that, we use that stamp to kind of make a new impression on the paper. And every time it's slightly different, you know, but still, well, it all goes back to the same idea.
Exactly. We previously did an episode on fairy tales, which are perhaps a great example of this, right? Because many fairy tales existed as oral traditions for centuries until documentarians like the Brothers Grimm wanted to write them down and preserve them and really kind of set them in concrete. But of course, because it was an oral tradition, just like that game of telephone, well, some details changed, and so you can have different versions of the same fairy tale.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if you wanted to produce a copy of something, I mean, let's just take a single sentence. I mean, if I say a sentence and if you say the same sentence, it's still not going to be exactly the same because our voices are different. But even if I repeated the same sentence several times, even then, I mean, the loudness might be slightly different, the speed, the intonation, where I make my breaks, the pauses in between. So it's very hard to produce a copy in speech, which is exactly the same.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you reach the limits of human short-term memory. I think I once saw that humans, our long-term memory is much stronger than our short-term memory. So it's difficult to repeat back verbatim what someone said, especially if it's long. So you might modify it, you might simplify it.
Yeah, you know what really impresses me? Actors. I mean, when you go to the theater and when you watch actors perform a play, I mean, it's the fairy tales and also like early literature, oral literature. I mean, very often it's got very strict patterns. It's got rhymes. It's got a certain meter, which means that you have a certain number of syllables that are stressed and unstressed in a certain pattern. And of course, that helps you remember things, particularly the rhymes. But when you watch a Shakespeare play, for example, I mean, those actors, I mean, they have to remember a whole book full of text, I mean, at least for the part that they're playing. And sometimes that's a lot. So it is actually possible for humans to remember quite a lot and to remember it pretty verbatim, that is, word by word.
Yes, yeah, exactly. That's my understanding, was that originally that was the purpose of writing these plays in meter, is that when you write the language in a rhythm, it helps to remember it. It makes it easier to remember. Probably we can think of usually song lyrics rhyme, and that also makes them easier to remember. Yeah, Shakespeare wrote in iambic pentameter, a phrase that I have grilled into my memory. Now, I don't remember what iambic means, but pentameter I can dissect into five meter.
Well, iambic refers to the sequence of the stressed and the unstressed syllables. And it means that you first have an unstressed syllable and then a stressed one. Da, 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 da. The opposite would be da 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 da, but you have da 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 da. So that's iambic.
Almost like a heartbeat. Yes, I can imagine that provides like a rhythmic track for the actors to stay along, and probably it makes it sound poetic. That's why Shakespeare's plays sound poetic. We always need to emphasize to people that in Shakespeare's time, people did not actually talk in daily life the way they talk in Shakespeare's plays.
Well, yeah, that's the special thing about literature, that it's not exactly like the way we speak in everyday context. It's something special. But most of the time, literature is written down in books. But do you know Fahrenheit 451?
Yes, of course. Yeah, by Ray Bradbury, one of history's most famous American novels.
Because there's something very special about books. Books get burnt there a lot, which I think is a very, very sad thing. That's such a horrible idea, burning a book. But there's a group of people and they actually want to conserve books. And so they learn them by heart, which I think is a very cool thing. So if you or if you wanted to conserve a book by learning it by heart, Dominic, what book would you conserve?
Oh, goodness. Maybe one that's just special to me or one that has historical significance?
I don't know. Up to you.
Oh, right. Oh, gosh. Well, the most printed book in history, I believe, is the Bible. Mm-hmm. And I can certainly imagine there are a lot of people who have read the Bible so many times, they might have portions of it already memorized just from reading it over and over again. Mm-hmm. Oh, goodness. It would have to be a book which is very, very deeply important to me. You know what? I love the children's book Charlotte's Web by E.B. White, who hilariously was one of the co-authors of The Elements of Style, one of the most... maybe the single most influential style guide in American English. I really love that book. Maybe I would memorize that to preserve it.
That's a beautiful idea. I think I would also learn a book by heart that I really cherish, and that's the fairy tales by the Brothers Grimm.
Excellent. Wow, we both kind of chose children's literature.
Yeah, kind of. For the fairy tales, it depends on your perspective, but indeed, I first read them as a child, and they mean a lot to me. That's why I'm also carrying out a lot of research on them. And so, yeah, I feel that's so important. They should be conserved. The Brothers Grimm wanted to conserve them, so if there was a situation in which I had to learn a book by heart in order to keep it alive, I suppose I would pick those. Yeah.
Excellent. And you're right. I'm letting the Disney interpretations influence me again. Yes, many of the original fairy tales could be quite mature.
Mm-hmm. The only problem is, of course, if I had to learn a whole book by heart, I'm not sure if I would manage to kind of reproduce it absolutely faithfully. Mm-hmm. But then, that's the impression that I have, that very often when you have a copy in language, it's not absolutely faithful, but functionally faithful. So very often you will feel, okay, this is a kind of identical copy. It's not 100% perfect, but still it's enough for people to say, this is a true copy of it.
Right. Yeah, I would think, for example, some words could be replaced with synonyms, because there are many words with synonyms that have very similar meanings. It could be very easy to accidentally swap one out.
Yeah, and possibly, people who are not attentive might not notice. But of course, in other contexts, every word counts, as we said before, when you have a quotation in an academic text, of course, then every word counts. And this is also very important when it comes to things like protecting the copyright of an author. And so we talked about plagiarism earlier. And of course, there's also some software that allows you to detect whether someone copied content from, let's say, existing material without disclosing it.
Plagiarism checker. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. In school, we had to submit our papers to this. And there was a certain acceptable threshold. Each teacher had a different one, like, 20%, 25% can be from somewhere else, different ratios. For every one line of quoted material, there should be 3 lines of your own original material. But that really depends on the teacher and the class. But yeah, very familiar with plagiarism checker software.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say in terms of how much of the material in there should be allowed to be quotations, like text directly taken from elsewhere. I mean, it also depends on the subject. So in linguistics, very often, I mean, we carry out empirical studies. So we will describe our method, and no one has carried out that study before. So that's a unique description, and then we describe our results. But of course, we do also occasionally quote other texts, whereas in literature, you might want to have longer passages that you quote because you want to talk precisely about those passages, or in legal texts, or I don't know, in political science, it may also be similar that you have to quote a lot more because on the one hand, you want to talk exactly about those passages, and on the other hand, because quotations might serve as evidence, whereas in linguistics, very often, we rather use empirical data as evidence.
Oh yeah. Like you said, like in the legal field, they deal with precedent, right? To show that something has happened before, has been decided before, and that is the evidence in support of your argument. So I saw in a legal paper once, it was an entire page of footnotes. Literally an entire page of footnotes. I always wondered, because sometimes footnotes can take up like half the page. I wondered, has there ever been a whole page of just footnotes? And I saw it in a legal paper once. That's how many citations there were.
Yeah. I can imagine that. And I mean, like in German academia, there was this tradition of having a lot of footnotes, but now you're trying to have fewer footnotes, at least in my field. But to come back to those plagiarism checkers, I mean, what do? I mean, basically, they look at how many words in a row also occur in other texts. But the question is, to what extent will all of this be plagiarized? Because let's imagine you had a sequence like, yesterday morning I went to the... I mean, let's assume you had written that in a text, and then it comes up in... possibly other texts. I mean, would that be an instance of plagiarism? I would rather say no, because I mean, that's a relatively short sequence and it's a lot of words that are very high frequency. They come up a lot in the language. And even in that combination, I mean, this is not really anything truly creative. So it's actually quite likely that here you just came up with the same combination by chance, or because it's so common that you can say it's like a chunk in the language almost. So quite a lot of the things that we say come in chunks, like good morning or how are you? I mean, they're stored as a whole even in our minds.
Absolutely, yeah. False positives. These plagiarism checker softwares, at least in my experience, do identify false positives because you're right. In language, we have plenty of set phrases. I mean, it's almost an example of fluency if you know these set phrases and you can use them correctly. So, whenever I submit a paper, it's going to identify some of my words that it thinks are taken from somewhere else, and then usually the software will allow you to click on that, and it will show you where it thinks it was taken from. And it'll say it's taken from another student's work at some other university somewhere else in the world. And if we just happen to phrase something the same way, I mean, it's usually short, like one sentence or something, but it's like, there's only so many ways you can phrase something. So I find those false positives quite annoying.
Yeah, and that's exactly the problem, because in academic articles in particular, I mean, there's certain ways of expressing things which are conventional, which are standardized, which you might even expect because it's the way it's typically done. And
exactly,
so
it's fluency. Yeah,
exactly. So not everything that is kind of formulated in a way that has been used before is plagiarism, because it might just be the sequence of words which gives you the feel of this sounds the way an academic paper should sound, This is a typical combination. But of course, there's other things. And I mean, we have to be very strict about that, because plagiarism is definitely not okay, which are creative and where we have to say, okay, I mean, if anyone uses this is not chance. And I have a beautiful example for you. It's the first sentence, the opening lines of the novel Ulysses by James Joyce, where it says, stately plump Buck Mulligan came from the stairhead bearing a bowl of lather on which a mirror and a razor lay crossed. I mean, if anyone produces that sentence exactly like that. I mean, it's almost impossible that it's created again, you know? I mean, of course, it's not completely impossible, but it's over 20 words. And I mean, there's some words in there which are not very common, like stairhead or lather. And I mean, also the combination lay crossed, you know? I mean, this is not a very common combination. The words as such are quite common, but the combination isn't. And if you combine all of this, of course, then you see, okay, this sentence is pretty unique. And if anyone has got this and doesn't reference it as coming from James Joyce, then this is definitely an instance of plagiarism.
Yes, stately and plump. I think one of my cats is stately and plump. Yeah, actually, you've reminded me, there's a subreddit called Brand New Sentence, which is dedicated to whenever someone finds an instance, you know, usually on the internet, of someone writing a sentence which is so unique in its combination of words that surely no one has ever said it ever before. And some of the results can be very funny. I recommend it.
Sounds very cool. Sounds like the kind of thing that I'm really interested in.
It's nerdy, but it's fun. It's a fun way to pass the time.
But then, of course, I mean, like, okay, that's very interesting instances of like uniqueness. But if we come back to copying, I mean, not all instances of copying are big things. And sometimes you even get copying within the same word or within the same sentence. So, for example, in word formation, sometimes the same linguistic building block is used twice in a row. For example, in 50-50, you know, there's some words where we just repeat a part, and we could also say that's a bit like a copy of the first part, and we call that reduplication, which means that you repeat it basically. Right,
yeah, or like, yeah, when you have a list, like you could have potato salad, pasta salad, and then salad. It's not normally salad, but we're saying that to emphasize that it's just the regular type compared to these other types. And it is kind of funny, isn't it?
It's absolutely funny. And I have to say, this is a great paper. It's called the Salad paper by Gila Gomeshi and colleagues. And so another example that they give is this Auckland? So meaning, is this the big city in New Zealand, or is it a different type of Auckland? So can't be the one that I mean, the typical one. So by repeating, you kind of pick out, okay, it's the most typical reading that we're trying to activate here. But in other cases, I mean, if you just have repetition, and I mean, copying and repetition would be the same here in this reading. You could, for example, say, oh, come in. Yeah, so you add emphasis to it. So yeah, not all instances of copying have to be quotes or something big, but it happens a lot in the language. And if we think about the word level, well, we could say, yeah, we're using a lot of copies in different places.
Yes, you're certainly right.
Oh no, yeah. Yes, a repetition. Oh, right. Dominic, you got me there.
I could do this all day.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Indeed.
Indeed. And, you know, on the topic of repetition, Christina, I think we're just about out of time for today's episode, which means it might be time to repeat our outro.
Oh, good idea. So stay curious, everyone out there. Have fun with language.
And join us next time on Linguistics Behind the Scenes.